What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love.
Probably the gunshots are not a good idea. All right, so that was Robert F. Kennedy, folks. He was likely going to win the 1968 presidential election until he was killed in June of 1968. And it was right after he won the California primary. So he was up against Herbert Humphrey for the Democratic candidate for president. And like I said, he was likely going to beat him. And then it was going to be the Republican candidate was Richard Nixon. I mean, of course, we'll never know.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Leaving behind 11 children. That's a lot of kids. 11 children. And one of them was not born yet. The last one was born a few months after he passed away. And his wife, Ethel Kennedy, who's still alive, thank you very much. So she raised 11 kids on her own. And the person who was found guilty of his murder is Sirhan Sirhan. Let me tell you who this guy is. He was born in Palestine in 1944, and that was before it became Israel. So that was during World War II when he was born. And that's important because he states later that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was a motive for why he killed RFK. So he was born in Palestine, and then his portion of where he lived was annexed by Jordan. So he kind of became Jordanian, and I say kind of because it's there's like it's a strange. It's like the Twilight Zone for a lot of these folks who are born in Palestine, and then it's like, are they Palestinian national, Israeli national, Jordanian? So that was the deal. He moved to America when he was only 12 with his family. He wanted to be a horse jockey. He was a really small guy, Sirhan Sirhan, and he wanted to be a horse jockey. He got a really bad head injury, which forced him to stop trying to do that. And that head injury was also important later, right? Because he would claim, I don't remember this, I didn't do that, and blah, 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 right? So let's fast forward to 1968. So he was working at the Ambassador Hotel, and that's where Robert Kennedy was making his speech after he won the California primary. And then sure enough, afterwards, him and his entourage, the RFK entourage, moved into the kitchen area of the hotel, and then Robert F. Kennedy was shot and killed. Now, the reason why I'm going over this is not it's not some sort of conspiracy theories or anything like that. I am a lawyer and I'm an expert in the law, so I'm going to kind of explain to you the legal process. And get this, that this all happened in 1968. Whatever, 50, how many years ago was that? 55, right? We're getting there. 55 years ago. And to this day, 55 years later, there's still legal issues over this because Sirhan Sirhan is alive. He's right down the street in San Diego in federal prison in San Diego. And he's 79 years old. Now, he's always up for parole. It's like 17 or 18 times. And he was granted parole by the parole board because they said he's no longer a threat to society and he's old and, nothing's going to happen if he's released on parole. But he's still in prison because then Governor Newsom vetoed the parole board. So he's still in prison. I made a small mistake. I said a federal prison in San Diego. It's the state prison in San Diego. I apologize. Okay, so now we're going to go over this. In his trial, in Sirhan Sirhan's trial in 1968, he was given an attorney, Grant Cooper, and to this day, there's legal disputes over whether or not his attorney provided effective counsel. Now, one of the biggest appealable issues in a murder case is if the defense attorney did a good job, because the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution reads, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to speedy trial and public trial by impartial jury of the state and to the which is the law, and to be informed of the nature of the accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against him, to have compulsory process against him. And here's the big one in this case, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So that is the United States Sixth Amendment. And what to this day, one of the very big appealable issues is if the defense counsel didn't do a good job, or there was some sort of conflict of interest, or the defense counsel set him up or something, that is a avenue to appeal a murder case. In April 1969, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to the death penalty in 1969. Thank you very much. That's like 54 years ago. He's still alive. Okay. So what happened was after he was sentenced to the death penalty, now his lawyer during the trial, his lawyer took the approach of kind of like telling the jury, okay, he did it. He killed him. But, he had diminished capacity. He had this head injury. He didn't know what he was doing. He had a tough life and this and that. So let's just not give him the death penalty. That was the goal. That was his lawyer's goal. And part of that goal, his lawyer admitted to everything in terms of, yeah, he killed him. Yeah, the gun was an accurate, possession of like it went from him, and how it's now into evidence here. There's a chain of custody that's proper. He just consented to it. Yeah, the bullets, if the prosecutors say the bullets match, I'm sure they do. He didn't object to that. There were witnesses that had conflicting stories, and one witness that said, she saw this other guy do it, which is a big deal. And his lawyer didn't interview that witness because the evidence against Sirhan was really bad. I mean, we had a lot of eyewitnesses saying he shot him. We had the police uncovered a diary of this guy that he stated he wanted to kill Robert F. Kennedy. Okay. The defense attorney just stipulated that was his diary. And then we have, remember I said it's going to come up, this whole the Palestinian-Israeli thing. So, and this is 1968 when RFK was assassinated. In 1967, there was a very big Israeli-Palestinian war, and a lot of other countries were involved. Hey, trivia. How long did the 1967 Six-Day War last? Hey, no Google, Mateo, no Googling it. 6 days. It was a 6-day war, and Israel won. And so this guy was very distraught about it. And he was especially distraught because RFK in his candidacy was saying that he would support Israel and give them military assistance and things like that. So this guy was, it caused Sirhan a lot of anger. Oh, by the way, why is his first name and last name the same? It's not, okay, a lot of people, I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, so I know this from the Middle Eastern and a lot of my relatives as well. The way they have their names is they have like a first name, sometimes they'll have a middle name, and then what would be the last name. Then in a lot of countries in the Middle East, after what's like the last name, the family name, they will have the first name of the grandfather, which was common back in the day. So they'd have the first name, the family name, and then the first name of the grandfather. And it just so happened that a lot of boys were and girls, would be named after their grandfather. So he was named after his grandfather, Sirhan. And so when they came to America, they just, because that was the last name in his name, they used that as his last name. So that's why even I have relatives that ended up in England, the Haskells, and that's not their true last name. It should have been Samo, but for these reasons. Okay, so that's why his first name and last name is the same name. It does make it easier though, right? Like in case I have to do something where I have to put his last name first, I will never get it wrong. Okay, so back to the trial. So he was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1969. Then, in 1972, the state of California, there was in a different case, the California Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty, as it was being administered by California, violated the California Constitution. Now, the United States has a constitution, and so does the state of California. And the way it works is if you want to punish someone, especially the death penalty, actually any sort of prison term or the death penalty, you cannot violate either the United States Constitution or the California Constitution if it's happening in California. And if it's happening in Missouri or Michigan or whatever, then you can't violate the constitutions if they have one in those states. So the California Supreme Court ruled in 1972 that the way the death penalty was being administered in California, they didn't have enough avenues of safeguard, and they didn't have enough like procedures in place, and it was too loosey-goosey, so to speak, right? So they just ruled in 1972 that the death penalty was violating the California Constitution. And then, by the way, this is a funny thing here. The United States Constitution, 8th Amendment, states there shall be no cruel and unusual punishment. In the California Constitution, it states there shall be no cruel or unusual punishment. Now, why is that important? There was this one United States Supreme Court case that stated there was like a young kid in Michigan got life for like very minor drug possession. And the United States Supreme Court said, well, that is a cruel punishment, but it's not unusual because a lot of states have that similar law. And the federal Constitution states that there shall not be cruel and unusual punishment. That's cruel, but it's not unusual, so it's not a violation of the federal Constitution. If it was the California Constitution, which says there cannot be any cruel or unusual punishment, then it would be a violation. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's a big difference, that freaking and an or word. So in California, it does have a more lenient standard, and the California Supreme Court, like I said it was unconstitutional, and they applied it retroactively, which means that even if somebody has a death penalty judgment, if they haven't been executed yet, they're off the hook in terms of execution. So Sirhan was, that kind of helped them. And it also helped a lot of the defendants in the Charles Manson cases, right? I mean, Charles Manson wasn't killed, wasn't executed by the state, and all these other defendants, one of them that just got parole, all these decades later. So they were saved by that 1972 law. Then in 1978, the California voters changed the Constitution to allow the death penalty and put in place all these different procedures to make sure that the death penalty would not be struck down by the California Supreme Court again. And one of those was that they'd have two trials, like a trial for guilt and a trial for does the jury agree with capital punishment. And then they had other procedures, like it could be automatically appealed to the California Supreme Court. Like the California Supreme Court cannot deny appeal on any case. I mean, they made it really good for lawyers because the California death penalty cases just last forever now. All right, so back to Sirhan. Okay, so his lawyer's goal in the 1968 trial was to tell the jury basically, okay, he did it, but he was freaking nuts. And because he was nuts, just let him off the hook. Don't give him the death penalty. Just give him life in prison. That was his lawyer's goal. And it didn't work, obviously. Now, all these years later, what has been happening is these appeals of that conviction. And as you know, and they keep trying it. And here's a little bit of jurisdictional issues. All right. Remember, jurisdiction. Okay. So the state of California found him guilty, and the state of California sentenced him to death. And then after that Supreme Court case, changed it from a death penalty to a life in prison penalty with the possibility of parole. And so that's the state of California. Once he exhausted any sort of appeals within the state of California, he is allowed to appeal to the federal court. And the federal court would then have jurisdiction to overturn a state court criminal case. And that is not an easy, I mean, that was, part of the Civil War, dang it, was fighting over the relationship and the power between the federal government and the state government. And that is a big power decision, would you say, that a federal court can overturn a criminal case of a state court. The opposite cannot be true, meaning if the federal court has some sort of criminal case and they say this guy violated a federal criminal statute, a state court cannot say, no, federal court, you are violating the Constitution. It doesn't go that way. It only goes from the federal down to the state. So after the Sirhan defense team exhausted all of their appeals within the state of California, they went to the federal court. Now, here's what I think. I think his lawyer was a disaster, and that it should be granted that he should have a new trial because that lawyer did not, from the standard. Now, remember what I said. I'm not saying Sirhan is innocent. I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm saying that his lawyer set him up. Okay, in the 1968 trial, and therefore he should have a new trial. Let me tell you why his lawyer screwed up. And his screw up was, just miserably bad, if I could say so myself. And I don't make fun of a lot of other lawyers, so it's not. I'm a lawyer myself. So the standard is that they have to act reasonably in a defense trial, and they have to act in the interest of their defendant, right? Who's their client. So if they're very incompetent or they had some sort of conflict of interest, against their own client, then that's not effective assistance of counsel and is a violation of the Sixth Amendment. So I'm not saying Sirhan is innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm just saying he deserves a new trial according to the federal law. Okay, so here's how his lawyer back then screwed up. All right. He screwed up by admitting that Sirhan killed him. He screwed up because get this. So there was an autopsy report, and the trial started in January 1969, like officially started, even though the case had been going on since earlier. But the actual jury and everything started in January 1969. And his defense attorney said, oh, yeah, the autopsy report, I don't object to it. And it's fine. Admit it into evidence. Let the jury hear about it. And he didn't even get a copy of it until February 22, 1969. The reason why that's a big deal is because the autopsy report had kind of, what the bullets were that killed RFK and the fact that, he was shot in the back of the neck. Whereas everyone said that this guy was in front of Robert Kennedy. So there's a potential discrepancy there, right? And that he just, because the lawyer, Grant Cooper was his name, because his goal was to not defend Sirhan in the fact of killing, or whether or not he killed RFK, was just to prove that he was crazy, so that the jury would give him a break kind of on the death penalty. He just said, yeah, let that evidence in, no problem. Okay, another big one is this. The defense counsel, that's Grant Cooper, never questioned any ballistics evidence and even stipulated regarding bullets that had not been introduced into court. So what that means is this. There was a lot of discrepancies in terms of, and one ballistics expert, even for the prosecutor said, oh, yeah, that particular bullet could not have come from Sirhan's gun. They don't match. That bullet doesn't go to that gun, right? The defense attorney for Sirhan just didn't bring that up. He just admitted that the bullets that the prosecutors brought in matched the gun. He just admitted it. He didn't. His goal was to not dispute that because he didn't want the jury to think that Sirhan was disputing it, just that the Sirhan was diminished capacity, and so therefore he shouldn't get the death penalty. Okay. Then defense counsel never did any ballistics test on the gun or any of the bullets. which is unheard of in a murder case. This is what Sirhan's current legal team states, which is true. He just never tested the gun. He never tested the bullets. He didn't do any of that, right? What do you think? Good lawyering? He didn't do any of that, all right? This is like tough for me to read because it's like, whoa, what was going on? Defense counsel undertook no investigation into the actual crime or the possibility of a second gunman. I mean, there were witnesses that said there was a second gunman, and he just didn't put them on. He didn't ask them. They were there at the Ambassador Hotel. He just ignored them. Grant Cooper, his lawyer, ignored critical eyewitnesses. Defense counsel never cross-examined eyewitnesses, including one that said she saw two people running away, right when it happened. Okay. Defense counsel never questioned Raphael Johnson about why he held on to the gun and did not turn it over to the police at the scene of the crime. The chain of custody should have been raised and a mistrial requested. What that means is this. So the actual gun that the prosecutor introduced into evidence when he told the jury, this is the gun that Sirhan used. So listen to this. So there was somebody that took the gun at the scene and kept it. He kept it. He kept the gun at his own house. Maybe he wanted to sell it. Maybe he wanted to keep it. Maybe he thought it was just a freaking souvenir of the 1968 presidential election. Like you get those freaking buttons. I got a gun that killed RFK. So anyway, that guy didn't give it to the police. It wasn't until later that he gave it to the police, and then the police gave it to the prosecutors. Now, the reason why that's important, right? You guys tell me why that's important. That is, in the criminal law, we call that chain of custody. And whenever something goes through that many hands and it's not well documented, either the jury should know about it, right? Or the judge could rule that it's inadmissible evidence. I mean, this is how some criminal trials are won by good defense attorneys, right? That kind of objection to evidence in front of the jury. Defense counsel never asked about Scott Enyard's photos, which were taken at the scene of the crime and then confiscated by the Los Angeles Police Department. What happened? There was these photos that somebody gave to the LAPD, and the LAPD said, yeah, we got these photos from this guy. And guess what? The defense attorneys never asked for those photos. Now, don't get me wrong. They could have just been photos of cute girls and guys at the hotel, right? Or they could have been photos that were good evidence, right? Wouldn't you have liked to see those if you were his defense attorney? His defense attorney didn't want to see it, okay? Defense counsel never objected to any evidence obtained without a warrant during a search of appellant's mother's house. What happened was they went to Sirhan's mom's house. Guess what her last name is? No, her last name was actually different because the immigration got it right with her last name, but not Sirhan's last name. Okay, so anyway, they went to her house without a warrant and said, we're going to search your house. She said, go ahead. And she didn't stop them, which is questionable in terms of if that's allowed. Because once you start allowing evidence that is brought in that should have had a warrant, for example, then the police say, hey, no problem, just go search that guy's house. Don't worry about a warrant, because the court will allow it anyway. But the goal for what's called the exclusionary rule is that if evidence is obtained in violation of the Constitution, then that evidence cannot be presented to the jury, even if it's important evidence. So if the police get a statement from the defendant without reading him his Miranda rights, that was a case called Miranda versus the state of Arizona, where the United States Supreme Court said, if you don't read the rights and you don't inform the defendant of the risk of talking to the police without a lawyer present, then you can't get that confession in, right? So all of that evidence that they got from Sirhan's mom's house, including the diary and all that other jazz, he never even tried to get that evidence thrown out. Do you see what I'm saying, right? Like, had that evidence of the diary, for example, not been included to the jury, that was big evidence, and he didn't try to get that kicked out, okay? Defense counsel never questioned why no blood or urine tests were conducted on Sirhan Sirhan at the time of the arrest. Meaning, was he drunk? Was he stoned? Was he, because there's some people that, remember, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? Some people are saying, oh, he was drugged or he was this or he was that, and at the very least, the Los Angeles Police Department could have tested him. They didn't. Okay, fine. But the defense counsel never asked why, he didn't care. Defense counsel never asked the medical examiner, Dr. Noj, to identify the bullets he removed from the senator's neck. Again, because there was the dispute, and then the ballistics expert for the prosecutor they knew, or one of them knew and said, that the bullets didn't match potentially with the gun that they said that was shot him. But they never asked the medical examiner, well, which bullets did you get? Did you get the bullet that's here in Exhibit 18 as the bullet that killed RFK? They never asked him. Okay, I could go on forever, so I'm going to stop pretty soon because it does go on forever. Defense counsel never called Thane Eugene Caesar to testify. A security guard who stood to the right of this RFK and had a gun in his hand. So there was a security guard. Remember, they're saying that this guy, Sirhan Sirhan, shot like 8 or 9 times, right? And it was only him that shot, is what the prosecutor said. There was a security guard that was right by RFK, and that security guard also had a gun in his hand and allegedly didn't do anything or didn't stop it or didn't shoot back or whatever, right? At the very least, the defense had the opportunity and the right to question that security guard. Ask him questions. Say like, dude, did you see him do it? Why didn't you stop it? Oh, did you have a gun in your hand? Did you shoot anyone? Is it possible that you tried to shoot and you accidentally killed RFK or whatever, right? They just didn't ask him anything. Good thing that when Joe Samo was 5 minutes late on sending a tax return in, I got a million questions, don't you? Right? 5 minutes late. Why is Joe Samo 5 minutes late on submitting his taxes? So they should have asked him some more questions here, more than zero. During the trial, the defense counsel admitted to the jury that, yes, Sirhan Sirhan is a danger to society, but he had diminished capacity, which was his goal during the trial, okay? Defense counsel never introduced evidence that Sirhan Sirhan's gun hand was pinned to a steam table after he fired 2 shots, while a senator was hit by 4 shots in the rear, raising the issue of a second gunman. Okay, what they're talking about here is true in the sense that everyone said, yeah, after the first couple shots, somebody jumped on him and grabbed his hand, the hand that was shooting, and that was right away. But there was 8 shots, right? And so a bunch of those shots came when his hand was pinned down because 6 guys jumped him right when they heard the first shot, So he fired 2 shots and then 6 guys jump him and there's a lot more shots happening. And the defense lawyer never asked, well, how the heck did he have such precise, shots when he was being pinned down? That's kind of crazy, right? Then I don't usually do this. After all of that horrible evidence, I saved the best for last or the worst for last, depending on how you look at it. His lawyer was Grant Cooper, the defense lawyer. He was under a criminal prosecution of his own by the same prosecutors that were prosecuting Sirhan Sirhan, because that lawyer, he was charged and arrested with stealing this it was called the grand jury paperwork and this grand jury transcript for a different case. He was defending these. It was the Beverly Hills card company, card meaning poker cards or something. And there was some sort of criminal case, and he was their defense attorney. And he took this paperwork that was supposed to stay with the prosecutor, but he stole it and he took it away from the file. Back in the good old days, there weren't no digital files. So if you take paperwork out of a file, it's not going to be there anymore, So it was a big crime, and he could have been disbarred. He could have went to prison. So many things could have happened. So he didn't disclose all of that properly. He didn't recuse himself. And coincidentally, after all of this, they basically they agreed to like a $1,000 fine, all right, for some serious criminal allegations that, like I said, could have gotten him prison time and could have gotten him disbarred, all right. So he had a definite, what we call in law, conflict of interest, all right. Now, in law, a conflict of interest does not mean that he took the bait or he had a deal with the prosecutors. It doesn't mean, like he could have said, I don't care about the criminal trial against me. I'm still going to beat up on the prosecution and deny all these things, right? But anytime there is a conflict of interest in a freaking murder case, that is such a big conflict of interest, that right there, in other cases before the United States Supreme Court, they ruled that was enough to show, ineffective assistance of counsel. So what I'm trying to say is just that conflict of interest part in other cases, and this one was really bad. In other cases, that was enough to show that the Sixth Amendment was violated and that the criminal defendant should get a new trial, So in this case, there was that. Then all those other things showing how incompetent he acted, right? Do I need to go through all those 30 examples? No. All right. So in my opinion, it's pretty freaking clear that Sirhan, who is still in prison 55 years later, should have a new trial. All right, cool. Now comes, what has happened is the federal courts continuously denied these requests for a new trial, like over and over and over. The lawyer, Grant Cooper, a lot of times defense attorneys, they get questioned or they have to provide testimony in cases like this. So this is from the words of Grant Cooper, the attorney for Sirhan. I did not retain an independent ballistics expert to analyze the slugs. Had I any feeling that in a case of this importance, Mr. Wolfer either willfully falsified his ballistics analyst or his conclusions, I would have hired an independent ballistics expert. Because of my firm belief that Sirhan alone fired the shots and that Mr. Wolfer, he was the ballistics expert for the state, was testifying correctly under oath, I did not have the bullets independently analyzed. All right. So what Sirhan's lawyer said in 3 years after the trial, he said, I was so convinced that Sirhan killed RFK that my tactic was not to question anybody about anything. Okay. Not the ballistics expert. I didn't have my own ballistics expert. I didn't have anyone checking out the bullets because even his lawyer later said, oh, crap. That seems fishy now that I think about it. Oh, had I had my own ballistics expert. Oh, had I just read what the ballistics expert said and cross-examined him. If I just looked at what the bullets were that were in the autopsy, then it could have been a different reaction. Okay. In arguing against the allegation of ineffective assistance, the government relied upon the overwhelming evidence of petitioner's guilt, in particular petitioner's own version of the events implicated. What they're saying, the government said over and over that, look, there were, everyone's entitled to a fair trial, not maybe a perfect trial, but nonetheless, there was so much evidence against the defendant that, even with all of these things, he still would have been found guilty. I don't know. I don't believe it because it was a lot. All right. So what is the current state of affairs? The current state of affairs, so Sirhan, 55 years later, he's still in prison. He has been up for parole about 17 times. And every time it takes a couple of years to get up for parole. And eventually the parole board has been granting his parole, meaning that the board who is hired and experts in kind of their biggest goal is to analyze, is this guy going to commit future crimes? They said, no, he's not going to commit future crimes. He's He's safe to be released. I mean, he's freaking 80 years old. What is he going to do? Hold up the old folks home or something? You know, he's fine to be released into society. He's been there long enough, 55 years. And even RFK's family, a lot of the RFK kids are saying, you know what, we don't even know if he killed him. We don't even, RFK Jr., for example, who's running for president now, coincidentally, said, I don't even think it was him that killed my dad. And they're not, so the biggest thing is this guy a threat to society? The next biggest thing is, what does the victim's family want? Like, would they be devastated if this guy's released? The parole board is saying, not really. Okay. And then even one of the victims who was shot is still alive. He's 91 years old. Paul Schrade. He said, yes, I was there. In fact, I got shot. And I saw someone else shoot RFK, not Sirhan. Because Sirhan was in front of RFK and someone was behind him, and it would make sense because the autopsy report said that the shots, that killed him came from behind the neck. And he's saying, and keep in mind, I'm a victim. Like he was shot that day. And he said, this is a funny part. He said, yeah, I think that the one shot from Sirhan got me, but before it got me, I saw that, this other shot got RFK. It was something where he said, no, I'm positive that he didn't kill RFK. And this guy was shot the same day at the Ambassador Hotel. So he's saying, I do not object, obviously, to the parole. And it's important because the state of California, in 2019, there was another inmate that stabbed Sirhan, but didn't kill him, but he stabbed him a bunch of times. And then, in our state, I mean, it's very costly to house these folks. So Governor Newsom, after the parole board said that the guy should be released on parole, he vetoed that. So because he has the authority as governor, like he could veto, like he could pardon somebody, and he could also reverse the parole. So if the parole board gives somebody parole, he reverses it. And he reversed it saying, no, I think he killed him and he was such a jerk, and RFK was such a great guy that probably would have been president, and so many people loved RFK, and he would have been a better president than Richard Nixon, right? Like, come on, Newsom. Anyway, so there you have it. I would love to hear what you think and if you've studied this or what your opinions are. As always, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.